This is The Empire Never Ended, the anti-fascist Amerikanski Balkan podcast about fascist terror and the state and the alienation, nihilism, and desperation produced by the capitalist system, and how to get rid of all that.
Something like that, yeah.
Well, how hard is it just to use the YF system and just count, all you have to do is think 1889 and then add 11 to sort of make it 1900 and then add your year to that. And then what's so hard about that?
Yeah.
So seems pretty simple to me.
Year 131. It's a very simple conversion. Yeah, so
for those of you that do not know, it starts on Hitler's birthday.
Yeah, that's right.
It's year 0.
So we are broadcasting our first series of episodes on year 131, year of Phaeon. The Magians would call it 2020.
Yeah, so for the first episode we decided for some reason to talk about David Myatt.
Yeah.
We'll see how many episodes it will be in the end. It's not certain still.
It's not just for some reason. He pops up a lot. You start reading anything in depth about Nazis, stuff that people have been talking about recently, whether it's Atomwaffen or any of these kind of more public.
Yeah. Or anytime a 15-year-old gets arrested for a terror plot that he wrote in crayon, there's going to be
something on the news.
Somewhere down the road.
The most dangerous man alive, David Myatt.
Yeah, so David Myatt is a British Nazi, born in 1950, and he's like an especially weird Nazi, but also
he's a special man.
Quite influential, so this is also the reason why we're talking about. There are things going on now that are directly connected to him.
And insanely prolific. This guy's written thousands and thousands and thousands of pages on National Socialism, Satanism, Islamism. He's gone through many phases in his life.
And especially on himself.
Yes.
Pretending to be other people.
Yeah.
Writing about himself.
And he interacts with himself under different pseudonyms.
Yes. And he quotes himself a lot.
Constantly.
But also about how much we don't need books, which I think is an ironic cherry on the cake there.
He's less book learning, more book burning.
He's more book burning, yeah.
I mean, how would you describe him? Like, just...
He looks like, for being such a dangerous man, he's like a little troll-like dude.
He looks like a troll. He looks like the actual toys.
Yes.
That you could like put their hair up in like a thing.
He has like a bushy red beard, or did at some point. He actually doesn't appear very often in front of cameras.
Yeah.
We were only able to find a couple recordings of him talking.
Yeah, he's adorable.
But he has, wears like a little tweed hat, rides a bicycle.
Yeah,
and
a little bushy beard. Yeah, tiny little posh voice.
Yeah,
an
posh accent.
upper class British accent. He's into cycling and gardening.
Yes. I can't stop thinking about him hanging out with like.
So he's not what you would expect to be like a hardcore pro-terrorism Nazi.
I think that maybe was more true before the 2000 2020 era. We got a lot of nerdy Nazis around right now.
Still, most people when they see them in the street, they wouldn't think a Nazi terrorist. When they see Charlie Sargent, they would think this is a psycho, probably, but not so David Myatt.
Yeah, a lot of the other guys that are going to come up in these stories are what you'd expect, kind of meathead, fucking bonehead Nazi to look like.
Right.
David Myatt is not one of those.
Right. Yeah. He's not a guy that makes you feel physically threatened, but I guess he probably has been.
But he's a martial arts expert apparently that trained in Asia and during his youth traveled the world learning the various arts.
I mean, this is also like the problem is that all of these things come from him, from his autobiographies, which are, and he's like, a proven liar and a fantasist. So a lot of these things are like questionable how much they're true.
But he worked as a bodyguard at one point in the 80s for some like British Nazis.
Yeah.
And he was arrested for street fighting and beating up anti-fascists.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so I was thinking like maybe, not usually when people start talking about him, they don't talk so much about Gladio. So I was thinking maybe we should start from that, because that's a very important thing, and there is like some connection apparently between David Myatt and Gladio. So I think it's not something that should not be mentioned. So I was just thinking to try to say briefly some things in the beginning what Gladio is. I mean, it's a very big topic. I think it's probably at some point we should do the whole series about that.
I think we're going to accidentally be doing a whole series about Gladio.
So, I mean, in the recent years, I think Gladio became much more well known than it used to be.
Absolutely.
I mean, but okay, still, just briefly, I will try to say something about it. So yeah, it was clandestine stay-behind operations, operation like by the usually military secret services of NATO countries, done in coordination with CIA and MI6. It started immediately after the Second World War. It was actually, it's older actually than NATO or CIA. It was initiated by OSS, the predecessor organization of CIA. Specifically by a person called James Jesus Angleton, who's a very weird guy, one of the founders basically of CIA. He was a chief of CIA counterintelligence from 1954 to 1975. And after the war, he was in Italy. And what he decided to do immediately, and general the Allies, they realized after they defeated, with the help of the Soviet Union, the Third Reich, they decided, okay, so now our main enemies is the Soviet Union. So, and they are the main threat. So also what they encountered at the time were the so-called stay-behind units, which were left by the Nazis.
Yeah.
So the idea was, okay, if we lose the war, we will have these stay-behind units here to organize a guerrilla war and sabotage against the new democratic regime or whatever. They were usually found out and arrested. Some of them were killed. But then, because the Westerners decided, okay, so the Soviets are the enemy, and we have all of these people who are basically here to do guerrilla warfare and sabotage, and they are super anti-communist, and we can basically just kill them. We have them arrested, we know who they are, or we can recruit them to be our allies in this new struggle.
From what I know, like you had U.S. or British agents like trying to grab these guys pretty much at the end of the war, at the moment that these people were being rounded up and executed, and saving these people from imprisonment and execution.
True. Yeah.
Going way out of their way to go find Nazis.
Yeah. So they recruited like horrible like war criminals, Nazis and fascists in Italy. Like in Italy, it was like this guy called Borghese, like Prince Borghese, called like the Black Prince or something. He was like a guy who was like, he was a commander of like a special like black shirts, like kind of not fascist Marines who were like executing partisans in Italy and like hanging them in the streets like to terrorize the population. So this guy was arrested and then recruited to work for CIA, and he was just around for decades in Italy, like writing forwards for like Julius Evola books and such things. So yeah,
normal Marine shit.
Yeah. So he was one of these people. So the idea was, okay, so we will just continue, I think the way they thought was, okay, we will have our own stay-behind units using these Nazis and fascists in the case of Soviet invasion. But then, okay, the thing is, you have a very strong communist party in Italy and in other Western countries. So, of course, they are a danger now. It's not only a potential Soviet invasion, it's the communists who are Italians and who were fighting against the Nazis the whole war and who didn't get to power, and now have a huge fucking party which involves a lot of population.
And took part in liberating large parts
Yeah.
of Italy during the war.
So it was not only that we have these fascists and Nazis waiting for a Soviet invasion, we'll actually try to use them to fight against leftists, anarchists, all kind of radicals in Western Europe. So the way they then switched to this so-called, what was called strategy of tension, which means creating tension, chaos through violence and terrorism specifically, in order to create a kind of very docile and fearful population that will then, of course, support the government and state in their repression, and also to pin all of this violence to the communists, the anarchists, in order to discredit them and to repress them after that. So, okay, this is like the theory, but these people actually did all of these things. I mean, it's quite amazing that all of the things they did. It kind of became well known. There were even some parliamentary inquiries in Switzerland, Italy, and Belgium in the early 90s about this. So they kind of basically the society, the politicians, some of them acknowledged that this was true, but it was never completely resolved, of course, and admitted. So okay, I'm just gonna mention a few.
But just I mean, tell me that this crazy empire ended.
Yeah.
At some point, right? I mean.
No, of course not.
It never did.
No, it never did. No, I mean, they usually say, okay, Gladio maybe ended at this point or something, but there's no proof that all of this, I mean, there's complete continuity. I mean, people who are organizing things and so on.
But look, also, I mean, if a tactic works, you don't necessarily have to keep calling it the same thing.
I mean, also, just to mention, Gladio was specifically the name of this operation in Italy, but it's usually used as a name for all of those operations. They had different names in different countries.
Yeah.
But just to mention a few atrocities they did, one of the most famous ones was the Piazza Fontana bombing from 1969. This is when a bomb exploded in a bank in Milan. It killed 17 people, wounded more than 80. And on the same day, there were 3 more detonations in Rome and Milan. So the group that allegedly did this, allegedly is I think the word that we can use in this podcast.
I think probably allegedly is still okay. Even definitely allegedly.
Yeah, is Ordine Nuovo, the fascist group, which consisted of some of the old or fascists and some neo-fascists, people who were actually part of the fascist party and newer, younger people. And but immediately after that, the anarchists were blamed for the bombing, and there were more than 80 arrests, mostly of anarchists. And one of them was Giuseppe Pinelli, an anarchist, who was then, when arrested, he fell out of a window of a police station from the 4th floor.
There's actually a famous play about this called "Accidental Death of an Anarchist," which is about this story.
Yeah, but Dario Fo.
Yeah.
And it's a famous case. But then, the media, the left, the anarchists, they kind of found out that actually people who are probably behind this are these Ordine Nuovo fascists, and specifically Franco Freda, Giovanni Ventura, and the leader of the group called Pino Rauti. But they were never actually they were tried for this 20 years later, in 87. They were actually arrested for this and tried, but they were never convicted. They were convicted about for some other bombings they did in Padova. Some of them got 16 years of prison. They were let out after. Franco Freda was a publisher of fascist literature after that. So there was some attempt to try them against in the early 2000s, but it was not possible because they were already acquitted in the 80s. So that's one of the most famous things. Then a big thing was a Bologna massacre. It was a bombing of the central railway station in Bologna in 1980 that killed 85 people, and this was done probably by the fascist group called NAR, Nuclei Armati Rivoluzionari. It probably involved the famous P2 Masonic Lodge, P2 Propaganda 2, which was probably the kind of, it was only out of convenience organized as a Masonic Lodge. This was basically a fascist CIA-run group that was the center of the Gladio operation in Italy. Then not all of these things happened in Italy. For some reason, Belgium was a very important thing for this operation. So one of the more bizarre and famous things connected to Gladio are the so-called Brabant killers or killings, which is like a series of murders and killings that happened in Belgium in the early 80s. This usually it's very mysterious because it was done by it was orchestrated as series of robberies, usually in supermarkets, banks and such, but it was not a lot of robbing going on, but a lot of killing and terrorizing people. And by people who were described by the media and population as for example, the giant, the killer, and the old man. These
so
are
what, they'd go into a grocery store and instead of robbing it, they'd shoot the teller.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, and a couple other people and maybe take some cash.
Yes. So this was this happened for 3 years. These people were doing, or 4, they were killing people in this one province in Belgium.
Yeah.
Same people, never arrested. There was a long trial, difficult court cases, which some of these court cases were against the detectives that were supposed to find out who these people were. It was a total mess. No one really was convicted of this. It was really suspected by the population that fascist and the state are behind it. The concrete suspects are some bizarre neo-Nazi group called Westland New Post, which is a Belgian section of Gladio is suspected. The leader of this group committed suicide at some point. So yes, it was never resolved.
Flemish group or something? Or?
I'm not sure. Nazi group, but I'm not sure exactly are they Flemish or whatever. So yeah, it's a whole mess, which was never resolved. It's it sounds like some kind of fiction, but yeah, it's totally true. There is a BBC documentary about it. You can find it, I think, even on YouTube, from '92. If you're interested. There's
about Gladio or the Belgian case?
About Gladio and about Belgian case specifically. Okay. They talk about that. There are people in the documentary talking who were a part of this fascist group who were doing this. One of the reasons it was found out is because one of the Italian guys who's I think his last name is Ventura or something. He was pissed off by the way the cops in the state were treating them, the Nazi terrorists. So he bombed a cop car and killed a bunch of cops. But he was still not arrested for that. He went to Spain, lived there, and but he was arrested when he started talking about Gladio.
Yeah, right.
And then he was sent to prison.
I thought it.
So even killing cops wasn't good enough for them to arrest him or something. So there's not a lot of things in English to read about it. There is one book you can find, and there is this documentary. So so we're going back now to Britain.
Yeah, but I guess the reason why this long intro to Gladio is important is to stress that. We know that this shit has happened.
Yeah.
It has a pretty common pattern. So when we get into more speculative territory soon, just kind of keep in mind that it's not as crazy as it sounds.
Yes.
There's...
And we know that the David Myatt has a connection to this.
Yeah, so let's talk about David Myatt's connection to this whole mess.
So the next thing we should talk about, which sets the context, is the post-Second World War neo-Nazi scene in Britain.
Skinheads, so don't fight each other. What the fuck is right? You're all thick or something. Bad enough everybody else against us, let alone skinheads versus skinheads. That's fucking poxy, right? Skinheads stick together.
Which is the origins of David Myatt. So usually the kind of well-known guy for British fascism is this Sir Oswald Mosley, who was pre-war, he was the leader of the British Union of Fascists. But there were other people in Britain who were fascist at the time and who were more hardcore than Mosley. One of these guys was a guy called Arnold Lees, who in 1929 started his own fascist group, which was called Imperial Fascist League. And this is a group which was much more focused on the so-called Jewish question. And they even considered that
more focused than who?
Then Oswald Mosley, who they called a kosher fascist, for not being enough against the Jews. So you can imagine how great people these were. So this Lees, he was a big part in the immediate post-war fascist scene, important guy in the British post-war fascist scene. So a lot of these people that I'm going to mention now were actually, why I mentioned him is because a lot of these people that I'm going to mention who are important to David Myatt were actually followers of this guy. So he even started his own publication, a fascist publication after the war, which was called Gothic Ripples, So
Gothic ripples?
Sounds
Yeah.
like a porn mag that you
Yeah.
buy.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
Goth club.
yeah, I mean it's like the Gothic ripples had like a column which was called N-word notes. So
God
it's
damn.
like it's very charming, and so this guy was a mentor to a lot of people that are important to the David Myatt story, like mentor of David Myatt mentors, let's say. So two important guys for this story and generally for the British post-war fascist scene are Colin Jordan and John Tyndall.
British National Socialist leader Colin Jordan. He wants to convert us all to Hitlerism, presumably with himself in the role of the British Hitler. What a creed.
So they're kind of they're the most important people for two sides of the British fascism after the war. One which is like this brutal pro-terrorist, pro-violence, openly Nazi side, which is represented by Colin Jordan, and the other barely kind of trying to not be openly fascist, represented by John Tyndall, who was leader of the National Front. So, but they were like buddies. They started in the early 60s, they were together. They were like good friends and both openly Nazis in the early 60s. And in 62, they organized a group which was called a National Socialist Movement. Very clear. They were like kind of very similar to American Nazi Party, these kind of brown shirt imitators, kind of ridiculous people.
They were in contact, right, with
Yes.
a lot of American Nazis at the time, right? Yeah.
They were friends with, like close collaborators with George Lincoln Rockwell.
yeah.
And they started also in 62 organization that they called World Union of National Socialists, together with Rockwell. Okay, so these two guys, they also like, to show you how close were they to the pre-war Lease guy, was that the Colin Jordan inherited the Lee's house, which became the center of the movement in a way. They called it like the Arnold Lee's house. This was the center of the Nazi movement organized by Colin Jordan at the time. So they were actually arrested, both of them together in the early 60s. I think in 62 for organizing a paramilitary Nazi group, which was called Spearhead. So this was like a public Nazi paramilitary group, which they organized to like supposedly to defend themselves from anti-fascists. So they were arrested, and at the time, Tyndall is like a very, you can find him because he was 2 times later, I think from 72 to 74, and from 75 to 1980, he was the leader of the National Front. And from 82 to 99, he was the leader of the British National Party. He founded the party, and then in 99 he was replaced by Nick Griffin, who later became the like European member of the European Parliament and so on.
Right.
So you can find him, like there's a lot of him on the internet. There's like speeches by him on YouTube and so on. And he's like a very stereotypical, like kind of British, pompous, like dumbass, but like thinking very highly of himself, and also like a Hitler kind of imitator. Like he's giving these horrible speeches, like trying to impersonate Hitler. It's very ridiculous. You can see it.
No power on earth is now going to stop this movement that we have created. No power on earth, no threats, no lies, no words, no laws are going to stop us.
They were arrested for organizing this paramilitary group, Spearhead. They didn't get long sentences, but Colin Jordan was out before John Tyndall. I think Colin Jordan was out after 9 months of prison for this. And then he got close to John Tyndall's fiancée. And the fiancée was a French Nazi person called Françoise Dior. She was the niece of the fashion designer Christian Dior. She came to Britain specifically to marry a Nazi. And she wanted to marry Tyndall, but then she changed her mind, and while John Tyndall was in prison, she married Colin Jordan. And this was like you can also find this, like, I think this happened in 63, the marriage. You can also find it, like, there is videos on YouTube, you can find it. It was kind of a famous, like, shocking thing in Britain. They organized a Nazi wedding. There was like an anti-fascist protest. They were like Sieg Heiling there. No, it was like
What's a Nazi wedding look like anyway?
Yeah, but they were obviously very, like, they enjoyed the attention and so on. this, of course, caused a split between John Tyndall. They were never they split, and so John Tyndall afterwards he went more into this kind of electoral direction of National Front, BNP, and so on. And Colin Jordan remained the ideologue of like this hardcore Nazi, openly Nazi, but also like advocating violence and terrorism side of the movement.
Let me just, before we get too far into that very serious thing, I want to answer Boris's question here. So this is what it looked like. Dior and Jordan had a second wedding at the NSM headquarters. The footage of the ceremony illustrated them mingling blood after cutting their ring fingers with a dagger before letting the unity drop fall on an open copy of Mein Kampf. They gave a Hitler salute, and Dior stated, "All I want is little Nazi children."
Oh.
By the way, she dumped Jordan soon afterwards, after that, for being too bourgeois.
I see that here. Nazi told marriage is over.
Yes.
Wait, so the
You're
Dior,
no leader, says
the
Francois.
heiress to the Dior fortune dumped this dude for being too bourgeois.
Yeah.
That's true. Yes, she was like a weirdo. She was like very good friends with Savitri Devi and those people. She was like, I mean, yeah.
Savitri Devi is something that we'll definitely cover at some other point. There's a lot to work with there.
Yeah. So they split, and in Jordan, Colin Jordan in 1968, he reorganized his group and renamed it the British Movement, which basically is the same group as the National Socialist Movement, but because some laws changed in Britain, they needed to drop the openly Nazi name, the swastika and such things, but it remained a very pro-violent, hardcore Nazi group called the British Movement. So this is also, it was officially organized in 68. I think this was the same year, or maybe 69, when our guy David Myatt joined the group. That's what we know. Maybe he had some connections before that, but anyway, this is the year when he turned 18, because he was born.
Which is also subsequently when he moved to the UK, because he was born in British Africa, in Tanganyika, which is now Tanzania, the Union of Tanganyika and Zanzibar.
Yeah.
And his dad was some sort of colonial official there. He was
part of the military, I think.
Yeah, he don't get too many details actually about who his father really was, but he's described himself as of independent means, which means that he's wealthy. And I think his first time back in Britain was to go to school, to go to high school, and presumably some posh public schools, they call them in England.
Yeah. So, okay, this is the time maybe to mention Column 88. So, Column 88, this is a Nazi paramilitary group in Britain, which is alleged to be the British section of Gladio. There is not a lot of information about it. Also, there is different information about it. It's on some sources say it was founded in the late 60s, some say early 70s. Some even claim that it was older than that Colin Jordan was introduced to it when he was 18, which would place it in the 40s. I think that's a bit early. But anyway, what we know is that it was this group, which was a paramilitary group that had connections with the British Army and was trained by a guy who was a British officer and a fascist, also follower of the same pre-war fascist list that I mentioned. So he was the military leader of this paramilitary group. And let me see if I can find his name here. His name was Major Ian Souter Clarence, so he was a major in the British Army. But he was also a pre-war fascist and the follower of the same guy I mentioned, Arnold Lees, who was the mentor of Colin Jordan and Tyndall. But they also had a kind of a political leader of Column 88, supposedly, who was called Leslie Vaughan, and he was a member of the paramilitary group Spearhead, for which, organizing it, Colin Jordan and Tyndall went to prison. So, this is interesting because we have, when you deal with these groups, they're usually not that big, and they have their public sides, they have their political sides, they have their more thuggish sides, they have their more paramilitary side connected to the state, sides that are meant to be viewed by the public. So like it's very difficult to say what is the relationship between this spearhead and Column 88. Is it the same group? One is kind of a public militant organization for supposed self-defense of a Nazi group against anti-fascist, and then it has a more covert side connected to the state for more like a more terrorist side, which they use the name Column 88 for. Or maybe like, I mean, this is all speculation. Maybe they first in the early 60s they tried to do their own militaristic Nazi group called Spearhead, got light prison sentences for it, and were recruited then to do the real thing.
That's pretty likely. A lot of these guys that we're going to look into, even going into future episodes, are going to go into prison and come out ratting on some bank robbery or something.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know, but this is okay, we're speculating.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and Column 88 supposedly appeared in the late 60s or early 70s, and supposedly disappeared in the early 80s. So 88, of course, in the name is 8 stands for the 8th letter of the alphabet, H. So HH means Heil Hitler. Very clearly, like a Nazi group. College Journal was supposedly also part of it, and also our guy David Myatt was involved in it. Anyway, like for a guy that looks like we described and behaves, you wouldn't say that, but apparently he was always connected to the more militant, pro-violent side of things, even like when he was a member of the British movement, he was like the bodyguard of Collie Jordan and such things. So he was involved in this group. So in the early 70s, Column 88 started doing some like violent things. They were like also like you could say terrorist things. So they carried out of several bomb attacks. This was usually on like left-wing anti-fascist, anarchist organizations, their bookshops, pacifist, anti-racist, anti-apartheid organizations, and such things. And also a lot of attacks on like Jewish-owned businesses. But they came to attention in 1975 when a local newspaper, a British newspaper called Western Daily Press, wrote an article about them, specifically in connection to them having a training together with the elements of the British Army. So this is it was kind of a little small scandal. So there was like some like a member of parliament asked some questions about it in the House of Commons. It was repeated in the more mainstream media like the Guardian. It was reported in the Guardian. And this is also when the British anti-fascist magazine Searchlight started writing and researching them a lot. And Searchlight was actually the magazine.
Is this the origin of Searchlight?
No, I think Searchlight has its own kind of funny, bit strange origins, which it's connected to like some militant anti-fascist groups, supposedly also connected with, like, allegedly with organized crime elements. So like militant.
Is this that O'Hara guy?
No. This is like a guy called Gary Gable, I think. They have like they're connected to the militant Jewish movement, anti-fascist, also communist. Some criticize them for some relations with the state. I don't know much about them, but this is it. Yeah. So they would.
Sorry. So. There's support of this, that this has this connection, this like militant Jewish leftism inside of Searchlight. It would just be funny because that is like the boogeyman of these Nazis is like the reason for turning against Bolshevism.
Yeah, they were some people who like this Gary Gable. He was a part of the. I think there is okay, maybe I'm wrong, but there is some like a famous British anti-fascist group which is called Group 64 or something like that, which has roots in some earlier anti-fascist group which was called Group 40 something. I'm sorry, but
no, they should apologize to you.
Yeah, this guy has some origins in that, but I don't know much about it, so I'm just
okay. I'm later topic.
Yes, so supposedly they disappeared in the early 80s. So, but also, it's definitely people involved in it were people we know connected to the Spearhead Nazi group and to the more political side of it, which is the British movement. So basically they were the same people that we know. And in the 70s, what happened was the skinhead Nazi movement appeared in the late 70s, and a lot of these people joined the British movement. So we don't know if they were part of the Column 88, maybe they were, but we know that they were activists and thugs for the British movement. So there are like a lot of interesting people there that you know from other stories maybe. One of them is like Nicky Crane, I just wanted to mention him.
Yeah.
He's like a famous skinhead guy. He was just general skinhead, because he had like a prototypical kind of skinhead look to him.
He was, if anybody's ever seen the Strength Through Oi, Oi compilation from back in the day, he's the skinhead giving the two fingers. Like really like kind of the archetype skinhead look. And he was a Nazi. He was a friend of Ian Stewart from Screwdriver. So basically it's Ian Stewart Donaldson,
sorry. And this whole crew also like this involved like people like from the band Foreskins, which is like usually not considered a Nazi band, but like at least two people attached to it were members of the British movement.
Supposedly, I think after the band broke up,
maybe,
and then it reformed. I don't know. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I also don't know, but I think the vocalist Gary Hodges was the member of British movement, and also the guy who's called Gary Hitchcock, who was the manager of the band. He later was a member of Combat 18, and also like some say the real leader of Combat 18. I don't know. So a lot of these people, including Charlie Sargent, who we'll learn about a bit later, were members of the British movement at this period. So they are members of the British movement at the same time where Column 88 exists. And supposedly we know two things. It's alleged that Column 88, about Nicky Crane, I just wanted to add, they didn't know that he was gay. And he was like, so he was a closeted gay man, but he was also out for some people, so he was active in the gay scene, actually also performed in gay porn movies.
It's pretty out.
Yeah.
It's about as out as you can get.
So they found out, of course, he was like in the early 90s, he was like cast out of the Nazi scene. Then he supposedly became an anti-Nazi when he was covered out. Okay, maybe it's genuine, I don't know. Then he died. Of complications connected to HIV. So it's a bizarre story. He also has the connections with the music scene, which we'll talk about later. I mean, some of the future episodes, I think we'll come back to Nicky Crane. Kind of a bizarre figure. So, what we know is supposedly, it's alleged that Column 88 disappeared in the early 80s. But we also know, like, from an article, I think from 98, called Memoirs of a Street Fighting Man, is that in this time period, Charlie Sargent and some of these people from the skinhead scene supposedly split with the British movement and starting doing like living a life of crime, being professional robbers, and using this to finance the movement. So is this connected, like the disappearance of Column 88 and the start of this, and their supposed split with the British movement? I don't know. But this is something that we can speculate on also a bit later. So I now want to maybe go to Combat 18 to say more about who this person, Charlie Sargent, that I mentioned a few times now, is. So, these people split from the British movement. They were the like most hardcore skinhead, violence-oriented people. Also, like petty criminals, drug dealers, like enforcers, like illegal debt collectors, football hooligans, yeah.
Especially later.
Yeah, I think we would call Charlie Sargent like a Shrek type. Like
he's an amazing person. Yeah.
He's just classic kind of bonehead, just in appearance.
I mean, he's like, I don't know, how would you describe him? It's very hard.
It's not if you watch British reality television.
Yeah.
He's just one of those guys on Gogglebox yelling at the TV.
Yeah. I mean, like ITV tried to do. I mean, they did a Combat 18 program in like the early 90s, and they tried to interview him, and you can find that it's beautiful. I mean, he's like
it's pretty great.
It's great.
Oh yeah, so he attacks the cameraman. Yeah,
he tries to attack the cameraman.
Let use it. Is it my address? It's not your address. Why don't you use your own address, Mr. Sargent? Why do you use an American address?
Here also, it was found out that later he tried to. the reporter who did that was on his hit list, and he would be killed if he wasn't arrested.
That's right.
But you're right, this was Gabby.
So yeah, it's amazing. He's an amazing person.
Was Charlie gonna get a friend of his to stab that guy in the back too?
Probably yes.
Yeah, that's his honorable way of dueling. You know, is he summons you and then has a friend of his.
Gotta maintain the Aryan honor code.
Get you in the back. Yeah, it's just the honor code, man. It's the impress.
So in 1992, now we're there. So we briefly go to the other side of the movement, to John Tyndall. I mean, of course, they're always connected. This is the more electoral kind of trying to be proper, but basically like very hardly conceiving that they're actual Nazis.
Yeah.
Because you have pictures of John Tyndall like in an SA uniform. So like he's the like but he's like the respectable like leader. So he's now started his like in the 80s his new group called the British National Party. He's the leader. He has problems with anti-fascists, militant anti-fascists. So he wants to organize a kind of defense, supposedly militaristic section of the party. So he calls on these people who left the thugs who supposedly split with the British movement, Charlie Sargent and his group, and they organized a group called Combat 18. 18, of course, means Combat Adolf Hitler. Yeah. So they become a part, like a militaristic part of the BNP. But of course, they are, from the side of the movement, that's totally not interested in electoral politics. They're interested in violence. So in next year already they split from BNP, and they are an independent group. Also, what's interesting is like it seems that they were like the largest group in the fascist scene at the time, because they forged like relations. They were connected with football hooligans, with like Chelsea headhunters, also with like loyalist paramilitary groups like UDA from Northern Ireland. They had like double membership with them, some of them. At the same time, there are like people who are like involved in, as I said, drug dealing, debt collection, and such things. So they have some money, but they also come from the so-called rock against communism scene, which is
a big part. I mean, this is how like if anybody who listened to punk music, eventually you come across, like RAC punk, and you'll find out about Combat 18 eventually. I mean, it's, Screwdriver, and a myriad of other Nazi bands from that era.
Yeah, I mean, so this is the thing. Charlie Sargent says in this article that I mentioned, he said that they split in the early 80s. They split with the British movement, and he said about 30 of us left, and that's when we got involved in robberies and all that. So they were like doing it for themselves, but also helping projects of the movement. So what happens in the 80s is the rock against communism music racist scene develops, also producing records, having bands, concerts. So you imagine maybe these projects that were helping by robbing is maybe connecting to this. But also what is important to say is that David Myatt, in some of his autobiographical writings, says that he insinuated he was kind of a robber, a thief, something like this. So this is probably because he was a part.
But he also refers to Combat 18 as kind of, what do you call them, internal barbarians?
Yes.
That are useful for kicking out the external barbarians, meaning like immigrants or something like that. So I mean, David Myatt is somebody who's this kind of posh intellectual part of the movement that's still part of the terroristic violent side of things. Just kind of looks at these guys as idiot, cannon fodder, basically for the cause.
Yeah, because if you go back to Gladio and such things, so in different countries there were different situations, and also in different time periods. So in 60s, 70s in Italy, they were used to discredit the Communist Party.
Right.
90s in Britain, there is no threat from communists coming to power. So I guess maybe Sokolum is supposedly disbanded in the early 80s. Maybe these people try to do different things. So if they go to this world of crime, robbery, so they still have some connections with the state, paramilitary groups.
Yeah.
They start funding the movement through organizing the Rock Against Communism scene. This culminates in 1987 when they start Blood and Honor, a very well-known like movement, also connected to music, but also like to terrorism.
Especially to like the
Yeah.
Nazi skin scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Nicky Crane was a big part of that. The person that we mentioned, he was like one of the founders with Ian Stewart Donaldson of Blood and Honor. So all of these are people ex-British movement people connected to Charlie Sargent. It's also like early 90s is when supposedly Combat 18 had members who were fighting before that in the Yugoslav war. This is alleged by Matthew Collins. Matthew Collins was a National Front member, I think, who then turned to Searchlight anti-fascist group and then for them infiltrated Combat 18. So he was basically a member of Combat 18 and he says that some members were fighting in the Yugoslav war in the 90s, first on the Croatian side and then switched to the Serbian side. Supposedly because Croatians made an alliance with the Bosnian Muslims, then they switched to the Serbian side, then they joined the Combat 18 group in Britain.
I think maybe it might be worth just a mention about why these people are as idiotic as they're eventually going to sound when we get to like their writings and the kind of stuff that they talk about. Like why they are a threat and why they're dangerous is partially for me made real through the Yugoslav wars, where you had essentially amplified super hooligans formed into battalions and stuff like this. Like these guys are like
which
an
actually
army in reserve,
probably in some
sort
way
of.
was utilized the model that happened in Britain before, right? Which is recruiting people from kids from football stands. Into political
But you can
movements,
see that
which hadn't really existed before. It was done in the UK.
But you can see what it looks like in a war, and it looks like this. It looks like football hooligans with tanks, like doing what you'd expect them to do, you know. And that
Kind of like robbing people's houses and
bandits,
killing people indiscriminately, and
So just to illustrate Charlie Sargent a bit better, I'll go to this article by Nick Ryan back to it called Combat 18 Memoirs of a Street Fighting Man from 1998, published in Independent. So this journalist, he met Combat 18 people in some London pubs and like tried to interview them. He had some conversations with them that he wrote down. So like you have like this scene where Charlie says how London is just becoming a cesspit, supposedly because there are like a lot of non-white people or something. And so the journalist asks him like, what is the solution? Charlie says, National Socialism. And then he asks him like to explain which is. And Charlie says, racism, the easiest politics in the world. So I mean, he's very he doesn't have any illusions about himself, which is kind of interesting. And then also what I found interesting was that when he tries to define his own group, he says, we're thugs who follow an ideology. So, which is like quite accurate and lucid. But this is like, I had a thought when I was when I saw this, because it reminded me of like there is like this American anarchist group that I like very much from the 60s. One of the best things about the 60s, in my opinion, connected to America, is this anarchist group, first like known as Black Mask and then later as the Up Against the Wall motherfucker. And this guy Ben Morea, who now lives in New York, who's like, I think, great and very interesting. So like it's very famous that he himself, like when he tried to describe their own group in the 60s, he said, we are a street gang with an analysis. So I was this kind of reminded me, because there is like a superficial similarity between those two things. I think they're very different, but like because one is like we're thugs who follow an ideology, and the other is we are street gang with analysis. There is a superficial kind of similarity. I think maybe this is like a superficial similarity that, I don't know, from a kind of mainstream centrist or liberal perspective, people would like makes such a superficial like comparison between anarchist and fascist and say okay they're similar or same, but it's very on a fundamental level it's very different, I would say.
Well, it's also opposite side. I mean, you could say that they're opposing sides on the same field of conflict and struggle. So it's natural that there's going to be a lot of similar language crossover between these two, because we're both of us, if we can make it that, Manichean, are looking for people who realize they're alienated. Yeah. And people who hate it. Yeah. And are willing to organize against alienation in some way. And so we're in the same, I don't know.
Yes, but it's also like, I think superficially only it's similar, but like fundamentally it's completely different. Because following an ideology...
Black Mask actually had an analysis, which Combat 18 doesn't. I mean,
but Myatt does. Myatt has analysis of their insane fucking...
I think Sargent is lucid because he actually says what is true. He doesn't say thugs with an analysis. Yeah. He says we follow thugs who follow an ideology. Yeah. And Memoirs says we are a street gang with an analysis. Yeah, you're so one have an analysis, which is analysis very different from an ideology. They don't follow the analysis, they have it. And these people follow an ideology and they see themselves as thugs, which is hard not to, see them as thugs. And these people describe themselves as a street gang, which is, I think, very different thing. So I think, this is like, okay, maybe, I don't know if this is an interesting comparison. It's just a thought that I had.
Did you hear also them talking about skinheads? About how...
Yeah. They said skinheads are basically vanquished. Yeah, this time they didn't like skinheads. Although I think they had...
Only skinheads are reds and queers.
Yeah. I think by that time, because there was skinheads since the 70s, so I think they were over with that thing. No. So they did basically the same thing as like a lot of same stuff that Column 88 did. Like they were attacking left-wing anarchist bookshops. I think Freedom bookshop was attacked by them. The anarchist bookshop in London. Like gay pubs, anti-apartheid activists.
There's a apartheid connection there because one of the founders of Column 88, spent time fighting in the Rhodesian Bush War, and then also subsequently, I think in Namibia with the South Africa, where he went to South Africa afterwards to like train South African forces.
Cecil Rhodes is a big hero to these.
Of course. No, but one of the Column 88 guys was a mercenary basically. In Africa.
David Myatt, like in one of his writings,
claims that he did that as well. Although actually, there's, I don't know. I have the name somewhere. Edit that out. We'll come back to it. I'm just joking. But yeah, one of them did actually spend time in Rhodesia, who was, I think, one of these ex-British Army guys. Which many of them did go down there.
So Combat 18, unlike many other British groups at the time, they drew ideological inspiration from the United States. So they supposedly adopted this strategy of leaderless resistance. They were inspired by the new KKK, had connections with it, and they were into race war and into inciting race war, which is a very American thing, I would think.
Totally, yeah.
So they wanted They were giving interviews. They were saying these non-white people, they won't start the race war on themselves. We have to incite them to start the race
Charlie Sargent said explicitly, we have to incite the N-words in Arabs. I and others personally dedicated to declaring war on the system over the coming years. I know that could mean death or life imprisonment, but I hope to light a touch paper to a fire so powerful that Zog will never put it out.
Yeah. So at the same time, Combat 18 had a quite lucrative music business because they were printing CDs. I think they printed in a few years 30,000 Nazi CDs and made quite they made 200,000 pounds or something. So they were the richest Nazi group in Britain.
They're probably also the richest DIY label in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think what's the name of Ian McKay's label?
Oh, sure, Discord.
Yeah, I think
they. But they made a big point about not making money.
I think they have.
They made some money.
Look, I went to another $5 show of Fugazi's in like 2010 or something, or more earlier than that. Must have been like 6. Must have been like 6 or 5, but it was a late show. Still $5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so they had a lot of money. They also had a lot of members. They had like supposedly like 200 members, which is like for a group as extreme and ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a lot. I mean, they were like one of the biggest groups in Britain and like one of the most wealthy groups, which is like insane when you have these like electorally like trying to be respective people, and then you have these like total boneheads, drug dealers who have like 100,000 pounds and 200 members. So they were like, but of course it was very, I mean, this was the end of them as well, because they started fighting again about money. So in 96...
Magians!
Yeah. I mean, so Charlie Sargent, he had like his right-hand man who was called Wilf the Beast Browning.
Yeah.
Oh, that guy's a great classic bonehead.
Classic, yes. There are also videos of him trying to attack trying to stab the reporter.
Yeah. And smacks the reporter, smacks the cameraman who's like, this is a very expensive camera. Like, he gives a shit about that.
Yeah, he wants to stab him.
Yeah.
George, watch out! The man's got a screwdriver.
That's capitalism. He's valuing the camera.
Yeah.
Please leave the camera alone. Don't touch the camera. Mr. Browning. Mr. Browning. Please don't touch the camera.
I'm sorry, is his name Will or Wilf?
Wilf.
Wilf.
The Beast.
That's a white I'd like to fuck. It's Wilf.
Ooh.
Nah?
No.
No. Cut that one.
So, they had this like label called ISD Records, which made a lot of money. They started in '96. The two guys, like the Beast and Charlie, started arguing over the money. What is interesting is like the Charlie was the leader of the less extreme part of Combat 18, which is also like, if you imagine, like he comes from the movement that has a connection with the state. Yeah. Maybe like in this time frame, maybe they would want him to be less extreme. Like, because the difference was that Charlie wanted to take this money and to use it like to be the dominant group in the Nazi scene in Britain, and the Beast wanted to do terrorism and to attack the state cops and like minorities and like everything. And Charlie was against that, so they were also fighting against because of this. And also like in 96, 97 there was like an ITV this documentary that we keep referring to, where they were attacking the reporters, which I think kind of alleged that maybe Charlie Sargent is an informer, that actually he works with the cops.
Right, which is also tied into his relationship with loyalist militias in Northern Ireland, right?
Supposedly, yes. This is one theory, yeah.
But as far as I know, that claim comes from the state, right? And the question is whether or not the state is to be believed about that.
I'm not sure. I don't think so. No.
Uh-huh.
I think the journalists said that, and then the Nazis picked that up, and they now the Combat 18 claimed for years that Charlie Sargent is informer.
Well, I believe there's a documentary in which the police themselves talk about having Charlie Sargent.
They talk that they had an informer. I don't think they named Charlie Sargent as an informer.
Okay.
Because like the Beast's side of Combat 18, they wanted to do a letter bombing campaign together with some Nazis from Denmark, and then someone snitched on them, and they were arrested, I think, before they did it. It was snitched by an informant that Special Branch had in Combat 18, but they never said it was Charlie Sargent. Right. So we don't know.
Okay.
We know that there was an informant for the anti-fascist group, but who was if it was Charlie Sargent, we don't know, but Combat 18 claimed that Charlie Sargent was the informant. So they had this argument, they split, and then they tried to they tried to make some agreement, like strictly like a pragmatic, practical one, because I think Combat 18 still, which is Combat 18, are the people who are now against Charlie Sargent, and his faction of the movement. They had like his like plastering tools, and like and he had the Combat 18's money, like £1,000, and also a membership list. So they decided to meet and exchange these things. So like the Beast drove his friend called Chris Castle to the meeting, and Chris Castle entered like Charlie's mobile home to do the exchange, and there he was met by Charlie Sargent and his friend Martin Cross. And Martin Cross was actually a guitarist of the Screwdriver.
Yeah. He played Screwdriver. Yeah.
And then they stabbed Chris Castle, Charlie and Martin did, like with a 22 centimeter blade and in the back, and killed him.
Yeah.
For which they got life sentences. But somehow Charlie got out of prison in 2014, and immediately after he broke his parole rules, met with all Combat 18 members, went to a pub, got drunk, started Zig Heiling, and got arrested, and posted pictures of that on Facebook.
Yeah, and these guys look like, if you just saw these guys in a pub, you were drinking next to them, you would think to yourself, by like 1 a.m, these guys are going to be Zig Heiling.
Yeah.
Like, they just look like old British gammon racist guys, like bubbles of lazy white racism.
Nazi joy.
So he went back to prison. This was the kind of so Combat 18 continued to exist after that, but people who used the name Combat 18 were people who were against Charlie Sargent and who claimed that he was a cop, an informer, and the people who were loyal to the Charlie Sargent loyalists were his brother Steve Sargent and David Myatt, who apparently pledged the
oath of loyalty. Says, but who knows about that shit too? Like that could have been after the fact, and who knows.
So apparently
oaths of loyalty are huge, though. That's an important thing.
Yeah.
You stand by that oath.
To Myatt, at least.
Yeah.
Well, to Myatt, to the Aryan race. It's all there. He wrote it down.
Myatt seems to be a little bit more invested in it than the rest of them. I think
in the Aryan race.
Yeah. I mean, it's also interesting to think about, even a conversation between Charlie Sargent and David Myatt. I wonder if they...
I can't imagine one. Yeah. I really can't.
Yeah, the common grounds that those two would have would be very, very funny to hear. I mean...
Yeah.
What's terrible about imagining society is that it eliminates the possibility of the numinous in our ways and forms in life, and causalities and incausalities and
black stew. Splatter sounds of vomit on the floor. Yeah, I can see it.
Now, Charlie Sargent was arrested. He's in prison, and his brother and David Myatt are the leaders of the pro-Charlie Sargent faction, which now calls itself the National Socialist Movement. So they're going back to their origins in a way, to Colin Jordan's group from the early 60s, which was called the National Socialist Movement, which is probably, it's a kind of generic name for a Nazi group, but probably it's not a coincidence. So they are, so they organized this group. This happens, I think, in 97. I think they split, and David Myatt becomes, the same year when Charlie Sargent is arrested, David Myatt is the leader and also the main ideologue of the group.
Sorry, doesn't Myatt also end up in jail at some point in this?
Next year, in 98, he's arrested. There is there are a lot of arrests of a lot of Combat 18 members. I think not for so long sentences. I forget why they were arrested, but he was arrested at some point.
Yeah, more interesting to know why they were let out, I think.
Yeah. So to go back a bit, a few years, so Combat 18 formed in 98 as a part of BNP. In 93, they split with BNP. About that time, when they split with BNP, 93, 94, a group calling themselves White Wolves appeared. This is like an extreme neo-Nazi group which wrote some texts, which were called like blueprint.
Do we know they're a group, or do we just think that they're a text? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, there's very differing information whether they were actually an existing formation,
or if this is the name of a tendency that was part of an organization, that, like the National Socialist Movement, for instance.
Well, this goes back because I mentioned earlier how with these groups you have a lot of these names, and it's questionable like what they they mean.
And when they say group, do they mean literally one guy? That's also often the case.
Yes,
very much possible.
Well, okay, so like when they National Socialist movement split with Combat 18, supposedly they took like 50 members, which is not.
That's a fair bit.
Yeah. So, like, you know, when we were talking about Spearhead and Column 88 and which is which, and so like maybe because this group appears about the time when Combat 18 split from BNP, explicitly for being an exclusively pro-violence and terrorism group. Right. So if you want to do terrorism, you want to claim terrorist actions, you need another name, I guess, not the one that's well known to everyone who are the members. So, okay, this is speculation, but maybe at this time White Wolves appeared as a kind of name to attach to terrorist actions they would do. Maybe. I don't know. So there was a text connected to White Wolves at the time, which supposedly was written by David Myatt, advocating like total conflict with the system, terrorist actions and such things that David Myatt is known for. And so in '97, so this is like when they split with BNP. When there is an internal split and National Socialist Movement is formed in '97, soon after that, new texts by the White Wolves appear. And in I think in '97, a guy called David Copeland, who was like young, I think at the time he's 20 years old, he joined the BNP, and there are photographs and videos of him close to John Tyndall. And then he left BNP because he was not satisfied with the electoral, like too soft politics, and he joined the National Socialist Movement, I think, in '98.
And from what I could tell, he advanced like really quickly. Like he basically he got his letter of acceptance, and then like 2 weeks later was like, and you are now regional chapter head for your city or whatever.
It said,
like,
welcome to leadership.
Like they hadn't even like met him in person yet.
No, this is how you used to be able to form right-wing splinter cells, is you send a letter in the mail with a congratulations note and a stamp.
And, you know, membership card.
And a membership card with your name on it.
Yes,
exactly. For covert activity, so no one knows who you are.
So this is not completely clear to me, because I think Copeland joined the National Socialist Movement in '98. At the same year, Myatt was arrested, and then this other guy, Tony Williams, became like the de facto leader of the group. So I'm not sure if there was like any time where Copeland was a member while Myatt was the leader.
I don't think so. Yeah.
I don't know.
But we should mention that...
well, because the interaction that Copeland had was only... He never had any interaction with Myatt at all.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But White Wolves, we do suspect, was at least partially written by Myatt.
Yes.
Not entirely written by Myatt.
Well, yes. There is... Okay, one thing that we'll talk in one of the... Maybe next or one of the other episodes is that I think this text contains the phrase... blood sacrifice.
Oh yeah, it straight up says blood sacrifice will be necessary.
So this is like an important thing that it will clear later why it's important. Copeland in '99 he decides to do some terrorism, and in April he makes his own nail bombs and places them in 3 places in London, like 3 different neighborhoods. Like I think this was like Brixton, Brick Lane, and also Soho. So with these 3 areas, he wants to target the Bengali community, the Jewish community, and the gay community in London. And he with this he killed 3 people, including a pregnant woman, and injured more than 140 people. This happened in April of 30th of April. Between 17th and 30th April, he did it on 3 consecutive weekends.
He's really
there's a kind of curious nature to at least the first 2 bombings that you, Fritz, were telling me about yesterday, which is that in both cases of the first 2 bombings, the bag got picked up by somebody and moved.
Yeah.
Which which is just kind of funny. In one case, the guy actually stole the bag and just put the bomb somewhere else.
And like
which ended up having it not kill anybody, right? Because he put it in a far more crowded area.
Yeah, but also people were staring at this fucking thing, and they were like, "Oh, I don't know, it's got a clock on it.
It's like
there's a ticking clock on some tubes. Like, I don't know, just put it here on the fucking underneath the cabbage, you know." And that's what they did. And then the dude gets a fucking nail in his penis.
Yeah.
Kid gets one in the head, like a baby.
Yeah.
But I think in the second case, it was foiled by what I understand to be an Irish guy who walked by and was like, "That's probably a bomb," and went to go to the police station and turn it in, but it was fucking closed. So he puts it in the boot of his trunk, and that's where it explodes. But I love it. And then the third one, love. I mean, it's you can't love any of this, but just from the sense of irony, this man defends the future of the white race by killing a white pregnant woman. As one of his only 4 victims, all of them white, by the way.
Well, you know who else killed a white pregnant woman trying to incite a race war?
Oh shit!
Yeah, it's a little sneak peek. Some future
Charlie
Manson. All right, well, let's talk.
I mean, they hate everyone. Okay, they're desperate, fucked up people, so they want to incite a race war.
What did his fucking brother say? Like,
I think he had was natural dislike of gay people. It wasn't. It was normal that a normal man would have.
His brother says this like way after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, when he was arrested, I think a month later or something like this. And he said, I think he straight up said that he was a member of the White Wolves. There was also a communique by the White Wolves claiming this action.
And Combat 18.
And Combat 18, yeah. So White Wolves said, no, it wasn't Combat 18, it was us. So I don't know.
Yeah, but as far as I saw, if you look at some, the pro-cop BBC stuff on it, the cops are like, we received it as like a prank call. We had no idea. We were really surprised by all this.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that the cops were very hesitant to link it to any far-right group, even though 2 far-right groups claimed it. They raided his apartment, found all this Nazi shit there, and swastika flags and pictures, cutouts of the actual newspaper articles about the bombing. Yeah. And we're like, oh, there's nothing to link it to any kind of established right-wing group. Motherfucker had literal Nazi shit in his fucking apartment.
Interesting.
And it was claimed by 2 Nazi groups.
Yeah.
And so when Copeland was arrested, he said that what he was doing was political, that he wanted to incite a race war. Was quite open about that. They found his National Socialist Movement membership card, and such things. Then after that, he also talked with some psychiatrists. He said that he was antidepressants, and then also he had some dreams and fantasies where he imagined himself as being reincarnated as an SS officer who had access to women as his slaves and such things, sadistic fantasies and such things. So he was
he was an incel basically. I mean, he was bullied in school for everybody thought he was gay and whatever.
I mean, it kind of sounds like poor guy might have been too. I mean.
Yeah,
there's a lot of ideas.
There's speculation about that as well. That the club that he bombed was one that he also frequented. But there's that's not substantiated.
So also his place a text was found. It's attributed to David Myatt, which is called A Practical Guide to an Aryan Revolution.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. So because of this, this is when David Myatt became sort of well known. I mean, there were reporters trying to ambush him, interview him as a person who was a crucial influence to David Copeland and such things. And
yeah, we'll get into the nitty gritty of that text and some similar texts soon. But
so this was an attempt to give some basic historical context to David Myatt, from Gladio to the nail bomber.
So to sum up, why are we talking about David Myatt, Ray?
Well, I don't know, because there's a lot of things going on today that are directly connected to him, which we'll talk in next episode.
There's also a lot of things that are going on in his style, stuff that is completely almost mundane at this point,
and around the world too. I mean, from North America especially, but New Zealand, Australia,
I guess
South America,
Balkans,
Balkans,
yeah,
all throughout Europe, of course.
Kind of
Sonic Big Division, Muffin, all the Iron March nerds.
But also people explicitly claiming to be inspired by him.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, that's I guess our introduction, the background of our golden boy, David Myatt.
I will also say the important thing is that, I mean, now maybe we framed it in a way that I think maybe usually it's not framed because of this. We made this direct connection with the Gladio thing, which is, I think, usually it's not something that's so much, it's overlooked, I would say.
I think since the only real biographical text about David Myatt is his own suspect take on his own life, that you kind of have to deal with historical structures to talk about this. This man is a product, maybe not intentional, but certainly not intentionally stopped either, and he's the perfect archetype of this era of just nonsensical fascism that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, we don't. I mean, you don't. When you want some sense of things, you don't look at fascism. So it's not unusual.
You should have told me that months ago before you invited me here. That's news I would have liked to have heard before I started reading fucking Vindex,
which we'll get to.
Let's let that be a little teaser.
Episode. So a little teaser.
Yeah. Do we want to do the teaser that we said that we want to do, the explicit one? Mentioning that he's a Satanist.
Oh, well, I think you just dropped that bomb just now. That was, I didn't know how to tell you
guys. Hear more about Vindex and Satan next.
Yeah, I feel like I just kind of ripped the Band-Aid off of that one for us. So.
No, but maybe explicitly say it.
Well, we're recording this, so I think
okay.
You technically just did it. We should maybe just
did it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's nice.
Stay tuned for some more Vindex and Satan.
Yeah, when the doctor tells you to look the other way while he sticks you with the needle, you know. You just sort of did it. 1, 2. He's a Satanist, by the way.